suddenly stumble. Wait, how exactly does the chlorophyll use the sunlight? What's the chemical reaction? That moment of failure is incredibly valuable. It's a diagnostic tool that tells you precisely where you need to go back and reinforce your knowledge. It prevents you from moving forward with a Swiss cheese understanding of the material. Research has shown that students who are prompted to self-explain while studying a new topic consistently outperform those who simply reread the material. They develop a deeper conceptual understanding and are better able to apply their knowledge to solve novel problems. Why? Because they aren't just memorizing the steps of a process. They are constructing a mental model of how and why the process works. They are building the narrative, the story of the concept. Think about the famous Feynman technique, popularized by physicist Richard Feynman. It's essentially a structured version of self-explanation. Step 1. Choose a concept. Step 2. Teach it to a child. This forces you to use simple language, analogies, and a clear logical structure. Step 3. Identify your knowledge gaps when you can't explain it simply. Step 4. Go back to the source material to fill those gaps, then repeat the process. It's a rigorous cycle of learning, explaining, and refining. This process also enhances knowledge transfer. When you've explained a concept to yourself, you've essentially deconstructed it and then rebuilt it in your own mental language. This rebuilt version is far more flexible. It's not tied to the specific wording of the textbook. Because you own it, you can adapt it, apply it, and connect it to new situations far more effectively than if you had simply memorized the original definition. Self-explanation works in synergy with elaborative interrogation. You ask why to create the initial connections, and then you use self-explanation to formalize and test those connections. Why is this true? Leads to an internal search. Okay, let me explain why this is true. Is the process that solidifies the findings of that search into a coherent, usable piece of knowledge. We're building a strong, articulate understanding. But so far, it's been very verbal. What if we brought in another sense? Our brains did not evolve to learn by reading text from a page. For most of human history, we learn by watching, listening, and doing. We are fundamentally multi-sensory creatures. Yet so much of modern education relies almost exclusively on one channel, the verbal. We read words, we listen to words, but what happens when we intentionally engage a second, incredibly powerful channel? This is the idea behind dual coding or multimodal learning. The theory, developed by Alan Pivio, posits that our brains process information through two distinct channels: a verbal channel for language, written and spoken words, and a nonverbal or imagistic channel for visual information, like pictures, diagrams, charts, and mental images. When you learn something using both channels simultaneously, you create two distinct but interconnected memory traces. This redundancy makes the memory far more robust. If one trace fades, you still have the other to rely on. It's like having a backup file for your most important knowledge. Think about trying to understand the human heart. You could read a paragraph describing the four chambers, the right atrium, right ventricle, left atrium, and left ventricle, and the flow of deoxygenated and oxygenated blood. You could memorize these words. But now, imagine reading that same paragraph while looking at a color-coded diagram. The blue arrows show deoxygenated blood entering the right atrium, moving to the right ventricle, and then going to the lungs. The red arrows show the newly oxygenated blood returning to the left atrium, moving to the left ventricle, and then being pumped out to the body. Suddenly, the abstract words right atrium become a concrete place on a map. The process of blood flow is no longer a sequence of facts to be memorized, but a visual journey you can trace with your finger. The words explain the image, and the image gives meaning to the words. This synergy is incredibly powerful. You are encoding the information both verbally and visually, creating a rich, interconnected memory that is easier to understand and recall. This isn't just about looking at pictures in a textbook. The most effective use of dual coding is when you create the visuals yourself. As you learn a concept, try to sketch it out. Create a flowchart for a historical sequence of events. Draw a mind map connecting key ideas. Create a simple diagram illustrating a scientific process. This act of translation from verbal to visual is a potent form of active learning, much like self-explanation. You are forced to decide what is most important and how the pieces relate to each other spatially. This is why infographics can be so effective. They combine concise text with meaningful visuals to explain complex topics in a way that is quickly digestible and memorable. Our brains are hardwired to process visual information with incredible speed and efficiency. A huge portion of our cerebral cortex is devoted to vision. By failing to engage this massive processing power, we are essentially studying with one hand tied behind our back. Consider the concept of a bell curve in statistics. A verbal description might be a distribution where most data points cluster around the central mean, with the frequency of data points tapering off symmetrically as you move away from the mean. It's accurate, but it's a mouthful. Now picture the simple, elegant shape of the curve itself. The image conveys the essence of the concept instantly and unforgettably. The verbal description can then add the precise labels, mean, standard deviation. The two work together. The key is that the visuals must be meaningful and relevant. Simply adding decorative clip art or random photos to a presentation doesn't help. The image and the words must be telling the same story, reinforcing each other. When done correctly, dual coding doesn't just make learning more engaging, it makes it fundamentally more effective by aligning our study methods with the way our brains are naturally designed to process the world. We're now armed with facts, connections, explanations, and powerful visuals. How do we organize it all? Our minds are now buzzing with interconnected ideas, verbal explanations, and visual models. But this rich web of thought can quickly become a tangled mess without structure. This is where the systematic practice of note-taking comes in. I'm not talking about mindlessly transcribing a lecture word for word. I'm talking about using a structured system to process, organize, and synthesize information as you receive it. A good note-taking system is not a passive storage device. It's an active thinking tool. Let's start with one of the most famous systems, the Cornell method. Developed by Walter Pauck, an education professor at Cornell University, this system divides a single page into 3 sections. The main largest section on the right is for your in-class notes, but you don't write everything. You listen, you paraphrase, you capture the main ideas. This forces you to process the information from the very beginning. Then, shortly after the lecture, you use the narrower column on the left to pull out key questions, terms, and cues from your main notes. This is a form of self-explanation and retrieval practice. The final piece of the Cornell puzzle is the summary section at the bottom of the page. Here, you synthesize the entire page of notes into 1 or 2 sentences. This act of summarization forces a high level of understanding. To study, you simply cover the main notes and try to answer the questions or define the terms from the cue column. It's a brilliant self-contained system for active engagement, processing, and review. Another powerful approach is mapping. This is a more visual, non-linear method that is perfect for dual coding. You start with a central topic in the middle of the page and then branch out with main ideas, which in turn branch out into supporting details. It looks like a spider web or a tree. This method is fantastic for brainstorming and for understanding topics with complex, hierarchical relationships. It visually represents the connections between ideas, making the structure of the knowledge immediately apparent. It mirrors the way our brain forms neural networks. Mapping forces you to think about relationships rather than just sequence. Is this idea a child of the main topic, or a sibling to another idea? Where does it fit? This constant sorting and connecting is a deep form of cognitive processing. It's less about capturing every detail and more about understanding the overall landscape of a subject. It's creating the blueprint for the knowledge structure you are building in your mind. Then there is the classic outlining method. This is a linear, highly structured system that uses indentation to show hierarchy. Main topics get a Roman numeral, subtopics get a capital letter, supporting points get a number, and so on. This method excels at organizing information that is naturally linear and logical, like a historical timeline or the argument in a philosophical paper. It imposes a rigid, logical order on the information, which can be incredibly helpful for clarifying your thinking. The power of outlining lies in its formal structure. It forces you to make decisions about what is a primary point and what is a secondary detail. You can't be lazy. This process of classification and organization is a rigorous mental workout. When you review an outline, you're not just reviewing facts, you're reviewing the logical structure of an argument or a system. Each of these systems, Cornell, mapping, outlining, is more than just a way to record information. They are frameworks for thinking. They force you to engage with the material actively, to make decisions about importance, hierarchy, and connection. They are the architectural plans we use to construct our knowledge. They take the raw materials, the facts, explanations, and visuals, and organize them into a coherent, stable, and useful structure. We have built a magnificent library of knowledge, but there is one final step. What do you do once you have more than one library? We have arrived. We have journeyed through memorization, spaced retrieval, deep questioning, self-explanation, dual coding, and structured organization. Each step has built upon the last, creating an increasingly sophisticated and powerful approach to learning. But all of these techniques have focused on mastering a single source. One textbook, one lecture, one perspective. Syntopic structuring is what comes next. It is the art and science of understanding a subject not by studying one source, but by orchestrating a conversation between multiple sources. This method, most famously articulated by Mortimer Adler in How to Read a Book, represents the pinnacle of intellectual work. It is not about simply learning what is inside a book, it is about creating new knowledge that exists between the books. It's moving from being a student of a subject to becoming a scholar of it. The goal is no longer just to understand what an author is saying, but to understand the entire conversation surrounding a topic. The process begins with creating a provisional bibliography. You identify the key books, articles, and essays on the subject you wish to master. This isn't just about finding sources that agree. In fact, it's crucial to find sources that disagree, that approach the topic from wildly different angles. You are assembling a panel of experts for a debate, and you are the moderator. You don't read these books cover to cover, at least not at first. Instead, you inspect them, looking for the most relevant passages that speak to your subject. The next step is to establish a neutral terminology. This is critical. One author might talk about unconscious drives, another about cognitive biases, and a third about instinctual behavior. They may all be touching on the same core idea, but they are using different languages. Your job as the syntopic reader is to create a common vocabulary, a master set of terms that can encompass the ideas of all the authors. You are building a Rosetta Stone for the conversation. With your common language established, you then frame a set of questions. These are not questions that any single author can answer definitively. They are your questions, born from your curiosity, that you will now pose to your panel of experts. To what extent is human behavior determined by genetics versus environment? What is the proper role of government in the economy? You then go back to the texts and find how each author implicitly or explicitly answers these questions. Now the magic happens. You start to map the conversation. You might note, author A and author C agree on this point, but for different reasons. Author B disagrees with them both, citing this evidence. Author D doesn't even address this question, which is itself significant. You are not just summarizing, you are synthesizing. You are identifying the major and minor issues, outlining the points of agreement and disagreement, and constructing a holistic view of the entire intellectual landscape. This is the opposite of rote memorization. It is the highest form of active, critical thinking. You are not accepting any single author's framework as gospel. Instead, you are building your own, more comprehensive framework that accounts for all the perspectives you've studied. You are creating an original analysis, a unique synthesis that is more than the sum of its parts. Your understanding is no longer confined to what one person wrote, it's a deep, nuanced, multifaceted mastery of the subject itself. This is how true experts think. A great historian doesn't just read one book about the Civil War, they read diaries from soldiers, economic analyses, political speeches, and multiple historical accounts, and they synthesize them into a coherent narrative. Syntopic structuring is a systematic way to emulate this process of intellectual mastery. It is the ultimate study method because its output isn't just a collection of memorized facts or organized notes. It's genuine, original insight. It's the ability to join the conversation. We've traveled from the simple echo of a memorized word to the complex symphony of a syntopic conversation. We've seen that learning isn't a single act, but a ladder of techniques, each one building on the last to create a more profound and durable understanding. The methods we've explored, from spaced repetition to dual coding to structured note-taking, are not just study hacks. They are research-backed strategies that work in harmony with the fundamental architecture of our brains. They are the tools you can use to move beyond the illusion of familiarity and build a true foundation of knowledge. So I invite you to take a moment and reflect. Look at your own study habits. Are you building with sand or with steel? Are you a passive spectator or an active participant in your own learning? Don't try to change everything at once. Pick one new technique. Try asking why during your next reading session. Attempt to sketch a diagram of a complex process. Organize your next set of notes using the Cornell method. Experiment, see what works for you, and start building your toolkit. The goal is progress, not perfection. But if you're ready to move beyond just learning for a test and truly aspire to mastery, I encourage you to explore the final stage of this journey further. Delve into the world of syntopic structuring. Pick a topic you love, gather your sources, and begin to orchestrate your own intellectual conversation. This is where learning transforms from a task into a creative act of discovery. This is how you stop being just a reader of the map and become the cartographer of your own understanding. The tools are here, the choice is yours, and as always, thanks for watching.